Well, I don't think that it's appropriate for Leader Pelosi or myself to give the White House advice on HR policy. I would extend an olive branch to Leader Pelosi and say that this is the time for bipartisanship. We should evaluate the politicization of the highest levels of our government, not in terms of its existing facts, but on what we need to do going forward so that this type of thing never happens again. Republicans and Democrats are going to be in government and in power in the foreseeable future, and I think it's appropriate that the investigative processes don't get tainted with these political considerations like they clearly were in this case.
Well, you say that like this type of thing, and you say political considerations were part of this case. How do you mean?
Well, the Democratic Party paid the Perkins law firm. The Perkins law firm paid Fusion GPS. Fusion GPS hired Christopher Steele and Nellie Orr. Christopher Steele wrote the dossier, and then Nellie Orr's husband, Bruce Orr, valeted that document into the Department of Justice. Then it was so unverifiable that they had to use a Yahoo News article before a FISA court to validate it. That Yahoo News article was planted by Christopher Steele, the very author of the dossier. Jake, this is the first time in American political history that an opposition research document has been injected into the bloodstream of our intelligence community. That's not a Republican or a Democrat concern. That's an American concern. And if for just a moment in this town we would put down our partisan swords and work together, I think we could develop a process that the American people would have greater confidence in moving forward for Republicans or Democrats.
Well, I mean, this memo is a Republican memo. Devin Nunes, the chairman.
Devin didn't write this memo.
Devin Nunes, the chairman, the Republican staff, as you know, committees have Republican staff and Democratic staff. This could have been done in a bipartisan way. It was not done in a bipartisan way. And in fact, Democrats submitted their memo to counter this. And that's going through a process right now. It's not being released at the same time. But I have to ask you, in this memo, it makes clear that a counterintelligence investigation by the FBI began in July 2016. Investigating George Papadopoulos. That's, of course, the former campaign staffer for the Trump campaign who has pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI about his contacts with Russia. If that is the counterintelligence investigation's genesis, which it is according to the Devin Nunes memo, the Republican House Intelligence Committee memo, why is the idea that Carter Page in October 2016, who had already been on the FBI's radar, we know he was surveilled in 2013, 2014, why is that evidence that this entire investigation is tainted?
I would point to the statements of Andrew McCabe before the Intelligence Committee. Mr. McCabe said that the dossier was absolutely essential, and but for the dossier, there would have been no FISA warrant to spy on American citizens.
Right.
That's particularly troubling in the context of the renewals, though, Jake, because as you well know, these FISA warrants have to be renewed every 90 days. So even after the FBI terminates Christopher Steele because they're mad at him for going and talking to the media and they deem him unreliable, they still repeatedly reauthorize the FISA warrant. And again, Andrew McCabe, not Republicans, but Andrew McCabe says, but for the dossier, that warrant would have never been issued, and it certainly would not have been reauthorized.
That warrant is what Nunes claims McCabe said, but I'm talking about an investigation, not just a warrant in October, but an investigation that began in July. The investigation, this counterintelligence investigation, according to the Nunes memo, begins in July because George Papadopoulos, as we know, said something to an Australian diplomat about how the Russians had dirt on Hillary Clinton. We also know, according to the Mueller plea agreement with Papadopoulos, that he had said that in, I believe, March or April, that he learned about this through a London professor who had relationships with the Kremlin. So my only point is the investigation into collusion or whatever, I mean, we don't know what it is yet, if anything, that investigation began in July. You're talking about a warrant in October. The investigation had already begun.
Correct, Jake. However, that information, if you take the entire universe of Papadopoulos claims and you put them into a bucket, that bucket alone would never have functioned as a basis to continue this investigation. It may have been sufficient to start it, but it certainly would not have been a basis for the intelligence gathering and the continuation of that investigation. If I just said Jake Tapper's a bad guy and he colludes with Russia, that may be the basis to start an investigation into you, but it wouldn't be able to be continued in the absence of actual facts. And unfortunately, instead of getting facts and getting a basis, there was a reliance on this memo from Christopher Steele that was so unverifiable they had to use a Yahoo News article from Michael Isikoff to be able to justify it before a FISA court.
Congressman, you're asserting a lot of things that I don't know to be demonstrable fact, but one of the things I wonder about is when you talk about what you know about Papadopoulos is we don't know. We have no idea what Papadopoulos knows. We have no idea.
But McCabe did, right? We don't have to even get into that, Jake, because McCabe was aware of all those facts, and he testified before the Intelligence Committee that this dossier was the proximate cause of these surveillance warrants, and that alone is far bigger than the Russia investigation. It's far bigger than Donald Trump's presidency. It goes to the very core of our democracy and whether or not we want to have political documents serve as the basis to spy on American citizens.
Sure,
we should rise above partisanship and solve that problem.
It's an excellent question whether or not it was just this political document, but FBI officials that we've been talking to and Christopher Wray, the FBI director himself, all of them say that there is no way a dossier like this would be presented in a FISA court without corroboration of some of the things they're talking about.
Right, but the corroboration was the Yahoo News article. The corroboration for the dossier was a news article planted by the very author of the dossier. So it becomes a factual and logical and legal tautology.
But how do you know that? Have you seen the FISA
Because that's what's in the memo. We should, honestly.
No, I'm not talking about a partisan memo. Have you looked
It's
at
not a partisan memo. These are statements of facts. You should not characterize it that way. These are verifiable facts. And the letter that I sent to Devin Nunes, signed by over 60 of my colleagues, calls not only for a release of the memo, but the actual supporting documentation. And I think it would be appropriate to redact sources and methods and to dig further into how this happened, because I think that'll help us forge bipartisan consensus on how to make sure it doesn't happen in the future.
I hope that there is bipartisan consensus. The House Intelligence Committee historically has worked in a bipartisan way. There's been a complete breakdown in that. I'm calling this a bipartisan. I'm calling this a partisan memo because normally the House Intelligence Committee and the Senate Intelligence Committee, they work together and put out a bipartisan memo.